Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you was never meant to echo in a man's ears. 8 seconds. That's all I need to turn your certainty into ash. There exists a birth recorded in 1847, buried beneath plantation ledgers, sealed by state clerks, whispered only by the elders who feared its memory. A slave woman, unnamed in the official record but known among her own as a quiet soul with a storm behind her eyes, delivered twins, but not the kind history knows how to explain. Their skin was pale, white as untouched frost, and their eyes glowed like embers cooling at the edge of a dying fire. Red, not irritated, not bloodshot. Red, as if something ancient stared through them. Doctors were summoned in secret. Priests too. Men of science and men of scripture, all standing in the same hot room, unable to name what they saw. And yet, none of them dared to record the truth. They wrote an anomaly. They wrote a curiosity. But not one man wrote what he felt in his bones, that these twins broke the rules of the world they believed they understood. And you must understand something. Institutions have always feared what they cannot categorize, because knowledge that escapes the cage threatens the cage itself. The plantation owner ordered absolute silence. He claimed the birth would disturb the order. What he meant was simpler. If the world learned that bloodlines were not as predictable as they claimed, that ancestry was not the closed system they preached, their entire hierarchy could collapse overnight. Power depends on predictability, on telling men what they are allowed to be. But these twins, born to a woman with no recorded European ancestry, stood as living proof that control is a lie, identity is engineered, and the boundaries of blood are thinner than anyone wants to admit. Some whispered that the mother had been visited by someone unknown in the months before her pregnancy. Others insisted the children were touched by something older, something tied to the rituals once practiced on that land before any plantation stood upon it. What is certain is this: every attempt to study them was shut down. Every attempt to document them was buried. And the few who saw the twins up close spoke of a presence, an intensity, that made grown men step back without knowing why. This is where your descent begins. Not with superstition, not with myth, but with a truth powerful men tried, and failed, to strangle in the dark. Before we go deeper, you need to understand the first rule of forbidden history. Anything that threatens the architecture of power is erased, not disproven. And the birth of the pale twins with ember-red eyes was a threat. The mother, Ilara, as whispered by the elders, was moved to a locked cabin far from the main quarters. Not for her safety, for containment. The plantation owner, a man obsessed with legacy and purity, believed the twins were a sign, not of corruption, but of trespass. He thought another man, someone outside his domain, had touched what he believed he owned. But every midwife who witnessed the birth knew otherwise. They had delivered thousands of children. They knew the shapes of faces, the shades of skin, the patterns of blood. And every woman in that dim-lit birthing room whispered the same conclusion with trembling certainty. These are not the children of any man. Hey. Rumors spread fast among the enslaved. Some said the twins' eyes glowed brighter at night. Others claimed the boys never cried, never wailed the way human infants do. Only stared, silent, aware, almost judging. A presence clung to them like cold air, like stepping into a room where something unseen has just left. But this is where the story twists. Ilara's lineage, though dismissed by the plantation owner as irrelevant, held secrets older than the soil beneath that land. Her grandmother had been a spiritual keeper, one who understood forgotten symbols, migration myths, forbidden genealogies. She carried knowledge of ancient unions between tribes and pale wanderers who crossed oceans long before recorded history. Bloodlines that defied the categories European scientists clung to with desperate hands. Bloodlines that could produce white skin from black lineage, and eyes touched by colors the ordinary world does not wear. When whispers of this hidden ancestry reached the owner, he panicked. Not because he feared the supernatural, but because he feared proof that identity, race, hierarchy, the entire structure of ownership he lived within, was a fragile illusion. So he sent for a traveling physician with ties to one of the early scientific societies, groups obsessed with classification, obsessed with measuring skulls, mapping blood, proving superiority. These were men who built systems of control under the banner of science, shaping public belief, deciding what truths were allowed to exist. When the physician arrived and saw the twins, he did not gasp. He did not tremble. He leaned in, studied them, and whispered something only one midwife ever repeated. These are the ones we were warned about." Those words were meant to vanish into the shadows, but they never did. They slipped past the tongues of the fearful, carried through the quarters by whispers that refused to die. And now, here's what you must understand. History is written by the victors, but fear is remembered by those who survive it. The twins, though infants, exerted a presence that the adults could not control. Their red eyes pierced the night, scanning, perceiving. They did not sleep like ordinary children. They did not react to hunger in the expected way. They seemed to observe the machinery of life itself, and react accordingly. Ilara, their mother, understood before anyone else. She had inherited an instinct, a dangerous, ancient clarity that had survived countless attempts at erasure. She whispered to those who would listen, "They see beyond what we are allowed to see. They remember what we are forbidden to know." No one knew how the plantation owner interpreted this. Perhaps he feared a curse. Perhaps he feared revelation. But the measures he took were extreme. The twins were separated from the other children. Guards were assigned to monitor them. Every action they took, every gesture, was catalogued like a crime waiting to happen. And yet, the more they tried to contain them, the more the twins defied control. Patterns emerged. The infants exhibited abilities that science, even the primitive physiology of the 19th century, could not explain. One midwife noted that objects moved in subtle ways around them. Candles flickered when they focused. Shadows stretched unnaturally in their presence. This was not superstition. This was observation, repeated and undeniable. And here's the truth they never wanted you to know. What is dangerous to power is often disguised as a myth. Red eyes, pale skin, strange behaviors, these are not anomalies. They are signals, indicators of bloodlines, of forces, of truths that predate modern civilization, truths that governments, churches, and scientists alike have spent centuries suppressing. Every attempt to catalog, to study, to normalize the twins failed. Every record that survived was distorted, sanitized, buried beneath layers of bureaucratic language, unusual pigmentation, ocular anomaly, rare case. The intent was clear, to make the extraordinary mundane, to convince the world that the unknown was acceptable, harmless, explainable. But you and I know better. The very existence of the white twins with red eyes is a crack in the structure, a fracture in the narrative you have been fed your entire life, a warning that not everything is as it seems. And now, you are falling deeper. You are seeing the threads that others cut, the patterns others hide. And once you follow them, you cannot unsee. History will tell you the twins were anomalies. But anomalies are simply truths that slip through the cracks before the gatekeepers can seal them shut. The physician who examined them, the one with ties to early scientific societies, did not arrive alone. 2 assistants traveled with him, men trained not in healing, but in recording. They carried notebooks bound in dark leather, filled with diagrams of skull shapes, ancient symbols, and genealogical trees far older than America itself. These were not ordinary medical men. They were hunters of bloodlines, archivists of forbidden traits. And the moment they saw the twins, something changed in their eyes. They did not question how pale children were born to a black mother. They did not ask why their eyes glowed like burning coal. They already knew what the twins represented. There are societies, quiet, unnoticed by the public, who track genealogical anomalies, bloodlines that carry fragments of ancient memory, families marked by colors and traits that do not fit the clean categories governments depend on. These societies do not seek to celebrate diversity. They seek to contain it. Because unpredictable blood produces unpredictable men, and unpredictable men cannot be controlled. And the twins were the clearest evidence of that unpredictability. During the examination, one assistant leaned too close. He later said the room suddenly felt colder, like standing in the shadow of something unseen. The twins did not cry. They simply stared at him, and he stumbled backward as if pushed by a force he couldn't quite name. That incident was never written in any formal report. But the midwives remembered, and they spoke of it for decades. The physician's final note, later burned by the plantation owner, contained a single line: "Convergence has begun." What did he mean? He meant this: when ancient bloodlines re-emerge in the wrong century, in the wrong land, within the wrong people, they destabilize the systems built to control mankind. And every empire, from Rome to Britain to the early American elites, has always feared the return of those forgotten traits, because they signal the collapse of artificially constructed hierarchies. Ilara knew this. She held the twins not with fear, but with recognition. She whispered a name to them in the dead of night, a word no one else understood, a word belonging to a lineage erased from textbooks, scrubbed from archives, forbidden by both church and state, a lineage that carried power not measured with wealth or armies, but with perception. The twins were not born to be owned. They were born to be seen. And that is why power tried to erase them. By now, you should feel it, the slow tightening of awareness around you. This is not a story you can unhear, not a history you can ignore, because the twins were never just children. They were a mirror, a reflection of what lies beyond control, beyond categorization, beyond fear itself. After the physician left, leaving only whispers in his wake, the plantation owner realized something that terrified him more than rebellion or disease. The twins could influence the living world without speaking. Their gaze altered moods, shifted behaviors, unbalanced the mental state of those who lingered too long. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it left a residue of unease in every room, in every corner of the plantation. Workers reported strange dreams, visions that came without warning, memories that weren't theirs. The adults dismissed it as hysteria, but children understood. Children always understand what adults cannot. Ilara watched her sons carefully. She taught them things, quietly, without words, gestures, patterns, signs, their minds absorbing secrets that humans were not supposed to know. She whispered about the systems, the invisible machinery of control woven into every authority, every law, every ritual. She told them how power thrives on obedience, how history is always rewritten to hide the truth, and how some knowledge is so dangerous it is outlawed in thought itself. But the more she tried to shelter them, the more the outside forces pressed. The same scientific societies, the same church emissaries, returned repeatedly. Each time, they brought questions disguised as observation. Each time, they left with fear disguised as resignation. And here's what you must understand. Fear is the weapon of the powerful. But knowledge is a different weapon, one that cuts deeper than chains or whips. The twins carried knowledge in their blood, in their eyes, in the quiet way they observed the world around them. By 1848, rumors had spread beyond the plantation. Letters sent between scholars spoke of children whose existence undermines the order of nature. They feared not only the unknown, but what the known might awaken. And this is where it becomes personal for you, listening now. The same invisible systems that tried to suppress these twins operate today. They control perception. They decide what you can question, what you can see, what you can believe. The red eyes are a symbol, a warning, a signal. And in this moment, you have a choice: to step back, remain blind, and accept the cage, or to look closer, follow the patterns, and descend further. If you are ready to awaken, leave this comment now. Twice. Type "I see beyond the veil." Twice. Lock it in. Seal your awareness. The descent is just beginning. When a man begins to see beyond the veil, the world does not get quieter. It gets sharper, colder, more precise. Every lie becomes visible. Every hidden hand becomes obvious. That is the shift the twins caused in everyone around them, even those who tried to deny it. By the winter of 1848, the plantation was no longer a place of routine. It was a pressure chamber, a silent battleground between what people believed and what the twins revealed simply by existing. The men guarding their cabin reported episodes of sudden dizziness, moments where time felt like it folded in on itself. Some claimed they heard whispers, though no one stood beside them. Others refused to enter the cabin altogether, saying the air felt too heavy to breathe. The owner blamed superstition, but superstition is merely truth without permission. Ilara felt the pressure closing in. She sensed that something was coming, not from the land, not from the people, but from the institutions circling them like vultures. She knew the twins' presence had triggered attention from forces that specialized in erasing anything that didn't align with their blueprints for society. Because the elites of that era, scientists, politicians, ecclesiastical councils, were obsessed with categorizing humanity. Why? Because once you convince a man who he is allowed to be, you never have to chain him physically. He will chain himself. The twins disrupted those categories. Their existence whispered a truth too dangerous to allow. Human potential is not controlled by blood, race, class, or ancestry. Human potential is controlled by belief, and belief is manufactured. That frightened the powerful more than anything else. So they acted. A letter arrived under the owner's door, no signature, no seal. Just a symbol, a circle split by a vertical line. It was the mark of a clandestine group that had existed for centuries, long before the Americas. A group dedicated to maintaining order through selective truth. The agents traveled under the disguise of scholars, missionaries, surveyors, but their purpose was the same: locate anomalies, suppress them, and remove any trace of their existence. The message inside was simple: the children must be surrendered. Their bloodline is not permitted here. Ilara never saw the letter, but she felt the shift. Mothers always do. She clutched her sons closer at night, whispering symbols and songs older than the plantation, older than the ships, older than the chains. She knew she couldn't fight the forces coming. But she also knew the twins were not meant to disappear quietly, because some children are born to change history, and some are born to expose it. The night the letter arrived, the wind carried a strange chill. It was as if the plantation itself had noticed the intrusion. The trees whispered differently, the shadows clung closer to the walls, and the very air inside the cabin seemed to hum. The twins, though asleep, stared slightly, their red eyes flickering beneath closed lids, sensing the threat in ways no adult could understand. Ilara knew the time was coming when the Watchers would act. They were not men of law, not men of conscience. They were men of power, trained to bend reality by controlling what could be spoken, what could be written, and what could be remembered. And their tools were subtle: isolation, misdirection, secrecy, and fear. The first attempt came quietly. A group arrived one evening, claiming to be physicians, offering care for the infants and assurances to the mother. But Ilara had learned the language of caution from her foremothers. She noticed the glint of steel beneath their coats, the precise way they moved as if rehearsed. They were not here for care. They were here for containment, or elimination. Ilara did not panic. She moved swiftly, guided by instincts honed in generations that had survived the erasure of knowledge and the oppression of men who claimed ownership over lives not theirs. She whispered to the twins, teaching them signs, patterns, and sequences, methods of perception that could alert them, even at a young age, to the presence of danger. The group lingered, suspicious, watching for any slip. They underestimated her. They underestimated what it meant to carry memory in blood and instinct. By the time the intruders realized they were being outmaneuvered, the room was empty. Ilara had vanished into the woods with her sons, leaving behind nothing but silence and the echo of their footsteps. The plantation owner, enraged, sent word to every allied agent he knew. The twins had become a symbol of defiance too potent to ignore. Reports reached distant cities of children with unnatural eyes seen at the edges of forests, always accompanied by a woman no one could track. And each report carried the same undertone: a presence that unsettled the observer, leaving them uncertain of what was real, what was illusion. Here's what most historians will never tell you. The power structures of the time were built on the assumption that you could own what you named and destroy what you feared. But the twins existed outside naming. They existed outside ownership. They existed as a living challenge to every authority that sought to dictate what reality should be. And that is why the pursuit never stopped. Because truth, once born, refuses to be caged. The forest became their first sanctuary. But sanctuary is never safety. The world beyond those trees had eyes. Eyes trained to see what others were forbidden to notice. Scouts, agents, emissaries, all operating under the guise of ordinary citizens, sought the twins. They were not sent to kill immediately. That would have been too conspicuous. No, they were sent to observe, to understand, to anticipate, to record anomalies and report them in code to distant holes of power. Ilara taught her sons to move like shadows. She taught them silence. She taught them how to read intention before it was spoken. And the twins, even before their first words, absorbed the lessons with uncanny precision. They could sense fear, desire, calculation, and deceit. They could sense it across distance, in the flicker of movement, the tone of a voice, the very rhythm of a human heartbeat. And in that observation, something extraordinary emerged. The twins began to communicate, not with words, but with understanding. Signals, gestures, subtle changes in expression, a shared cognition that adults could not penetrate. They were becoming something that defied classification, not merely children, Not merely humans in the conventional sense. They were extensions of ancestral knowledge, carriers of forbidden memory embedded in blood. Outside, the forces hunting them adapted. They brought instruments, charts, telescopes, notebooks, and eventually threats veiled as negotiations. They attempted to lure the twins with familiarity, food, comfort, false promises of protection. But every step was counted, every approach detected and anticipated. The plantation owner's letters grew frantic. He wrote to colleagues, to church elders, to physicians, warning them that something unprecedented was emerging. They see. They know. They move where no one can follow. The language of panic seeped into his correspondence, a tone historians later misread as delusion. But he was not insane. He had simply encountered what no structured power can accept, an uncontrollable presence that challenged hierarchy itself. And now, imagine this. Generations of humans have been taught that reality is orderly, predictable, manageable, that systems, rules, and institutions can contain everything that exists. The twins disproved all of it. With a glance, a pause, a gesture, they reminded every observer that human perception is limited, that authority is a fragile veneer, and that the natural order is not theirs to control. This is the lesson hidden in every suppressed record, every destroyed report, every anomaly erased from history. What the powerful fear most is not rebellion in arms, but rebellion in existence itself. And the twins existed. By 1849, the twins were no longer simply children. They had become a phenomenon. People who glimpsed them reported sensations that cannot be explained, a tightening of the chest, a sudden clarity of thought, memories that were not their own. Adults, hardened by labor, cruelty, and fear, confessed to hearing voices in empty rooms. Scholars and emissaries who documented their observations later claimed their notebooks were stolen or burned by unseen hands. Ilara realized something vital. The twins were not meant to hide forever. They were carriers of knowledge, of truths deliberately obscured by centuries of power structures. And those who controlled the dissemination of truth understood that suppressing the twins would require more than observation. It would require a system, a network, stretching across cities and continents, dedicated to erasing anomalies that threatened authority. It was not science that frightened these men. Science is merely a tool. No, it was the implication, the revelation that human history, human blood, and human identity could defy their constructed boundaries. And if these twins' existence was proof, then everything built on predictability, obedience, and categorization could crumble. The twins learned quickly, not through instruction, not through reading, not through spoken language. They absorbed patterns, signals, and the hidden rules that govern human behavior. They observed power in action, its methods, its weaknesses, its blind spots. And in doing so, they became more than children. They became the living embodiment of resistance to control. Ilara documented none of this in writing. She knew that paper could be seized, burnt, or misread. Instead, she taught the twins the old ways, lessons encoded in gestures, symbols drawn in sand, sequences repeated until they became instinct. The forest itself became their classroom. Wind, water, and earth carried lessons of perception and survival. And here is the cruel brilliance of the forces aligned against them. The more they hunted, the more the twins learned. Every threat became a teacher. Every attempt at containment revealed a vulnerability in the system. And each time, the twins adapted. This is where most histories stop. They reduced the story to folklore, to myths of children with strange eyes, to legends of pale infants surviving in forests. But the real lesson is darker, deeper, and more dangerous. The twins were awakening perception in a world designed to suppress it. They were proving that awareness cannot be contained, that reality bends not to laws or orders, but to those who see its hidden mechanisms and move accordingly. And now, by listening to this, you are seeing a fragment of what they revealed, something the world was never meant to witness. By the turn of 1850, the twins had grown beyond the reach of ordinary control. No longer mere infants, they moved with a presence that unsettled even those trained to ignore fear. Their eyes, red as embers, were not just unusual, they were instruments of awareness, capable of piercing pretense, detecting manipulation, and discerning intent in a way that defied conventional understanding. Ilara had transformed from a mother into a guardian of forbidden knowledge. She taught them the secrets of perception and influence, showing them patterns hidden to ordinary minds. how to read the tension between words and actions, how to sense the hidden hierarchies operating beneath social facades, how to anticipate the movements of those who believed themselves untouchable. Every lesson was coded, every action deliberate. The twins were being trained not just to survive, but to see the architecture of control itself. Meanwhile, the forces that had pursued them escalated. Emissaries arrived under cover of night, under false titles, and with promises meant to deceive. Every attempt to lure, trap, or negotiate with the twins failed. Their perception was too acute, their instincts too sharp, and with each failure, those who sought to suppress them became increasingly desperate. It was in this desperation that the true extent of institutional fear became visible. Letters circulated in scientific circles, religious councils, and elite social networks, describing children who defy nature and warning that their existence could unravel not just local power, but global systems of hierarchy and obedience. The language was cryptic, codes and symbols, but the intent was clear. These twins represented a crack in the constructed order, and cracks are dangerous because they spread. And the twins themselves, though still young, sensed it. They began to act in ways that went beyond instinct. A glance could halt a man in his tracks. A gesture could redirect attention without words. They were learning not to manipulate directly, but to influence indirectly, by exposing the patterns that governed human thought and control. Ilara whispered to them, often in the dead of night, "You must understand, children, that power fears what it cannot define. Fear bends it. Clarity breaks it. And here's the truth most men never see. Clarity is dangerous. Not because it threatens comfort, but because it threatens obedience. Once you see the mechanisms, the chains no longer bind. Once you recognize the hidden currents, the tides of control can be navigated, avoided, or even redirected." The twins had become not just observers of the world, but catalysts. And the world would never forgive such catalysts. By 1851, the twins were no longer merely anomalies, they were symbols. Symbols of what the powerful fear most: uncontainable potential, knowledge outside their control, perception beyond their authority. Their existence exposed the fragile illusion upon which human hierarchies are built. Every law, every command, every moral edict relied on predictability. The twins shattered that. Ilara understood the magnitude of what she carried. She whispered lessons older than the plantation, older than the country itself. They learned to read intention in the way a leaf trembles in the wind, to sense deception in the rhythm of a heartbeat, to recognize authority for what it is, a veneer masking fear and limitation. The twins were being trained in the language of unseen forces, the silent rules that govern perception and influence. Observers came less frequently now, but with increasing intensity. Their agents were scholars, merchants, clergy, all trained to catalog, evaluate, and suppress anomalies. Yet each encounter only strengthened the twins' perception. Every attempt at control revealed another layer of the mechanisms that bound human behavior. Each failure was a lesson. Each step toward them was a map for them to understand the architecture of Fae. And here's the critical point. The twins were not learning to fight in the conventional sense. They were learning to exist beyond control, to bend influence without confrontation, to observe the invisible strings and decide which to follow, which to cut, and which to ignore. Their awareness was dangerous not because it could destroy, it was dangerous because it could liberate. The plantation owner, now older and more desperate, began to crumble mentally. Reports from his allies spoke of nervous breakdowns, irrational decisions, and fear that seemed to cloud every judgment. For the first time in his life, he realized the extent of what he had underestimated. A pair of children had undone the system he believed unassailable. Ilara, meanwhile, continued to teach them quietly. She spoke in riddles and gestures, guiding them toward understanding patterns, hierarchies, and human predictability. She whispered, "Power only exists because men believe it exists. Perception is the true dominion. And here's the deeper truth you must grasp. Perception is everything. What the world calls power, wealth, or influence is merely collective belief enforced through fear. Break the belief, and the edifice collapses." The twins understood this instinctively. They embodied it. And now, by listening to this story, you are glimpsing the same architecture, the same machinery of influence that has controlled men for centuries. The twins' notoriety spread quietly, like a current beneath the surface of history. Outside the forest, Rumors grew of pale children with glowing eyes moving like shadows, vanishing when approached, leaving grown men unsettled, unsure of what they had seen. Scholars recorded anomalies in coded language. Clergy whispered about children touched by forces beyond God. And yet, every formal record was scrubbed, every mention buried beneath layers of bureaucratic or religious authority. What most fail to understand is why this suppression exists. It is not just fear. It is control. Knowledge has always been the currency of power. The powerful fear what cannot be quantified, contained, or owned. And the twins, with their eyes like burning coals, embodied the uncontainable. Ilara continued their education relentlessly. Every day was a test, a lesson in observation, anticipation, and influence. The twins learned not merely to see. They learned to sense the patterns that others could not perceive. They noticed how men moved when lying, how wealth masked insecurity, how laws were tools of compliance rather than justice. And in learning, they grew dangerous, not physically, but intellectually, psychologically, existentially. One evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, Ilara paused and spoke with a gravity that would leave a mark for decades. You must never mistake what is visible for what is real. The true world operates on rules you cannot see, and those who perceive them are the ones who survive. The twins absorbed this, as they had absorbed everything, with the intensity of beings who were more than children, more than human. They began to predict the moves of those hunting them, not through logic, but through instinct sharpened by centuries of ancestral memory embedded in their very blood. The hunters adapted. They brought emissaries trained in deception, experts in persuasion, men who manipulated perception like a blade. Yet the twins anticipated each move, counted every attempt without confrontation, leaving the agents frustrated, exhausted, sometimes terrified. And here's the principle at the heart of their power. The world fears what it cannot define. It fears perception beyond control. The twins were living proof that existence itself could resist containment. And in resisting, they became a symbol for anyone who had ever been confined, silenced, or dismissed. Even today, the echo of their presence ripples through history. Scholars dismiss the records as myth. But those willing to see, the ones who look beyond the surface, understand. Control is always fragile. And anomalies, once born, can never truly be erased. The descent deepens. By 1852, the twins' awareness had outgrown even the sanctuary of the forest. They moved with a presence that distorted perception. Those who encountered them felt a subtle unease, a sense that reality itself had shifted. Adults swore they glimpsed movement in the corners of their vision, or heard whispers that vanished when they turned to listen. Children understood intuitively what adults could not articulate. These twins were more than human. Ilara guided them carefully. She had become a master of concealment and insight, teaching them to read not just humans, but the invisible currents of influence that govern behavior. They learned to anticipate deception, to sense fear before it was spoken, to recognize authority for what it truly was, a fragile construct maintained by belief and compliance. Hunters grew more methodical. Letters arrived from distant cities, carried by trusted agents. Scholars, clergy, and officials communicated in code, exchanging instructions on how to intercept, observe, and suppress the twins. Each attempt, however, was foiled, not by brute force, but by perception. The twins understood patterns before they were executed. They moved with precision, anticipating threats in ways that seemed almost supernatural. But the real danger lay not in being captured. It lay in the lessons the twins carried. Knowledge embedded in their bloodline, passed down through generations erased from history, contained secrets of influence and perception that the elites could not tolerate. To them, these children represented a rupture, proof that human potential could exist outside control. And a rupture, once exposed, cannot be ignored. Ilara whispered to them often, "Remember this, the world bends to belief. Power survives because men accept it. But those who perceive the hidden structure of thought, they are free." The twins absorbed the teaching, internalizing it until instinct became intelligence. They moved like shadows, communicated without words, and read the intentions of those who tried to dominate them. Their red eyes became not just a physical anomaly, but a symbol of awareness too sharp, too clear, for ordinary minds to endure. And here's the essential truth. The system fears those who understand it. The hunters' efforts intensified, yet every measure only strengthened the twins' perception. Every trap, Every strategy, every hidden observer became a lesson. Every attempt at containment revealed weaknesses in the very institutions that sought to control them. By observing the twins, you begin to see what the world fears most, that existence itself can escape the mechanisms of power, and that perception, sharp, unflinching, awake, cannot be owned, dictated, or erased. The twins' influence extended beyond mere survival. By 1853, whispers of their presence had reached towns and plantations miles away. Merchants spoke of fleeting shadows that moved unnaturally. Travelers reported feeling watched, as if unseen eyes measured their intentions. Scholars recorded pale children of extraordinary perception in coded diaries, only to have those documents confiscated or destroyed. The pattern was clear. The world's structures of control would not allow such anomalies to exist, and yet the twins persisted. Ilara continued their education relentlessly. Every day was a lesson in awareness, observation, and influence. She taught them how to detect manipulation before it occurred, to see the intentions behind words, to perceive the subtle signals that governed human behavior. These were not skills of mere survival, they were weapons against the architecture of control itself. The hunters adapted. They sent emissaries under the guise of helpers, teachers, and even distant relatives. They approached with gifts, promises, and empty smiles, attempting to lull the twins into vulnerability. But the twins, by now almost unnervingly perceptive, recognized the patterns immediately. They could sense deception as clearly as one senses wind on the skin. Every attempt at control was anticipated, deflected, and recorded in silent understanding. And here lies the lesson buried beneath every erased account. The world fears perception more than violence. Force can be resisted, confinement can be escaped, but awareness, true, sharp, unblinking awareness, cannot be contained. It threatens the invisible threads upon which authority depends. Ilara whispered to them often, "Understand, children, those who think they control reality only do so because others agree. Break agreement, and the edifice collapses." By this point, the twins' red eyes had become more than physical anomalies. They were a symbol, a reminder that human systems of hierarchy, obedience, and fear are fragile, dependent on belief, and vulnerable to those who perceive the unseen. The agents who pursued them began to report phenomena that could not be explained. Lights moving without source, shadows that detached from objects, animals reacting to invisible presences. Objects subtly shifted in ways that defied expectation. Every encounter heightened the twins' reputation, not just as children, but as living disruptions to the control mechanisms of the world. And now, by witnessing this story, you are brushing against that same perception. You are being shown the architecture beneath appearances, the hidden currents shaping thought, belief, and obedience. The descent deepens. The truths grow more dangerous. By 1854, the twins' presence was no longer merely a secret whispered in the shadows. It had begun to affect the wider networks of power, unseen but undeniable. Scholars and officials wrote of anomalous children whose existence challenged their categories of race, blood, and inheritance. Reports were passed in code between elite institutions, societies of science, clerical councils, and covert networks designed to maintain control. Each report carried the same urgent warning. These children were dangerous, not because they could harm physically, but because they could undo belief itself. Ilara understood this clearly. She had become not just a mother but a custodian of forbidden knowledge, guiding her sons through lessons meant to preserve their autonomy and sharpen their perception. She taught them to sense intention, to detect manipulation, to see the hidden structures of authority and fear. They absorbed it with unnatural speed, instinctively grasping concepts adults spent decades mastering. The hunters escalated their efforts. They sent observers skilled in persuasion and misdirection. They tried to tempt, coerce, and mislead. They attempted psychological traps, laying false paths, planting misleading symbols, and staging scenarios designed to provoke errors. And each time, the twins responded with uncanny awareness. They moved in silence, communicated without words, anticipated the smallest deviations, and emerged unscathed. This is the principle the elites had never learned. Systems of control rely on predictable responses. Obedience is maintained through expectation. But when perception exceeds expectation, when awareness grows beyond imposed boundaries, the system fails. The twins embodied this failure. They were living proof that authority, hierarchy, and fear are constructs vulnerable to anyone who sees beyond them. Ilara would whisper at night, "Never underestimate the value of perception. It is sharper than any blade, more enduring than chains, and more disruptive than armies." The twins' red eyes became a warning, a symbol, a revelation. Those who encountered them reported experiences beyond rational explanation, shadows behaving independently, objects subtly displaced, animals reacting to unseen presences. Every encounter left observers unsettled, uncertain of what was real, and questioning the boundaries of human comprehension. And here is the unspoken truth. Control cannot survive unperceived. Power depends on ignorance. Authority is maintained by compliance. The twins demonstrated, with terrifying clarity, that the world's structures are not absolute. They are illusions enforced by collective belief, vulnerable to those who perceive the hidden currents. By 1855, the twins were no longer simply anomalies, they had become forces. Their red eyes, once described as unusual, now carried the weight of awareness, perception, and presence. They moved with a precision that unsettled grown men. They understood the invisible rules of influence, how fear is manufactured, how compliance is achieved, how authority masks weakness. Every agent sent after them, every emissary disguised as scholar or priest, returned with reports that described sensations rather than facts. Unease, disorientation, a creeping awareness of patterns that could not be escaped. Ilara's teaching had transformed them. They learned not to react, they learned to observe and anticipate. Every gesture, every glance, every whisper became data, a map of intention and hierarchy. They could sense manipulation before it was executed. They could perceive control as it spread through a room, through a network, through a system. They were being forged into living instruments of insight, children whose minds operated beyond the constraints of ordinary perception. The hunters, trained in secrecy and observation, were frustrated. Each failed attempt to capture or influence the twins revealed vulnerabilities in the systems they had been taught to rely on. Bureaucracy, protocol, hierarchy. Every mechanism of control could be anticipated, bypassed, or disrupted by those who understood the patterns hidden beneath. The twins embodied this knowledge. Ilara whispered often, "Power fears perception. Knowledge disrupts order. Awareness cannot be caged." And she was right. The world outside the forest, governments, churches, scientific societies, relied on predictability. They relied on belief in authority. They relied on the assumption that men would comply, obey, and accept the narratives handed down. The twins' very existence disproved all of it. They demonstrated that reality could be observed, understood, and acted upon independently of imposed order. Observers who encountered the twins noted subtle distortions in their environment, shadows behaving differently, animals responding to unseen presences, time seeming to stretch or compress around their gaze. No rational explanation could contain these experiences. Those trained to categorize, control, or suppress became unsettled, uncertain, fearful. And here's the lesson buried in their story. The structures that dominate society, fear, hierarchy, obedience, are fragile illusions. They survive only as long as perception is limited. Awareness, sharp and unflinching, dissolves the illusion. The twins were proof. And by hearing this, you are being shown the same truth. The descent grows darker, the revelations deeper. By 1856, the twins' presence was no longer a secret. It was a phenomenon that threatened the very structure of authority around them. Even from a distance, the aura of awareness they carried unsettled those who sought to study, control, or eliminate them. Every observer who approached with intent to contain felt a weight in the air, a subtle pressure that made the ordinary rules of cause and effect seem unreliable. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, sounds bent in space. The boundaries between what was real and what was perceived began to blur. Ilara understood the stakes. The children were not merely alive, they were carriers of perception that defied containment. She guided them meticulously, teaching them not only to observe but to internalize patterns of influence and control. Every gesture, every glance, every microreaction in another person became part of their understanding. They learned to anticipate decisions, predict deception, and recognize the invisible hierarchies that govern compliance. Hunters grew more methodical. They used agents skilled in manipulation, logic, and persuasion, believing they could outthink children. Yet the twins responded not with force, but with insight. Every attempt to corral them was counted before it was executed. The children moved like living algorithms, calculating probabilities and outcomes with a precision that bordered on supernatural. Here is the critical truth. Control is fragile because it relies on perception, not fact. Authority survives because humans agree to it. Obedience is maintained by limited awareness. The twins, by perceiving the hidden architecture, exposed the fragility of all power structures. They were more than children. They were the embodiment of clarity, awareness, and autonomy. Ilara whispered often, "Remember, children, those who see the rules can bend them. Those who perceive the system can step beyond it. And those who understand fear can dissolve it." The red eyes of the twins became symbols, not of horror, but of awakening. Anyone who encountered them reported strange experiences. The sensation of being observed without being seen, a subtle distortion of reality, fleeting glimpses of truths usually hidden from human consciousness. These experiences were documented in private journals, then systematically erased. But some fragments survived, encoded in letters, sketches, and oral accounts passed down in secrecy. Every fragment pointed to the same lesson: perception exceeds control, knowledge exceeds authority, and awareness cannot be chained. And by following this account, you too are stepping into that same awakening. The descent continues, and the truths become increasingly dangerous. By 1857, the twins were no longer simply human. They had become catalysts for perception itself. Their red eyes, once a curiosity, now radiated a presence that unsettled even the most rational minds. Those who approached felt reality shift subtly. Time seemed to stretch, sounds became distorted, and a faint pressure weighed on their consciousness. Ordinary observation was no longer sufficient. Understanding the twins required an awareness that most humans were never trained to access. Ilara guided them with deliberate care. She taught them not only to read the intentions of others but to interpret the invisible threads connecting thought, action, and hierarchy. Every gesture, every whisper, every micro-expression in another person became data to analyze. The twins learned to anticipate actions before they occurred, to recognize patterns of control before they were enacted, to discern hidden fears that even adults could not articulate. The hunters intensified their efforts. Scholars, officials, and agents arrived under every conceivable guise, armed with tools of logic, persuasion, and observation. They attempted to lure, deceive, and isolate. But the twins' perception had become preternatural. They sensed intention in subtle shifts, an unspoken glance, a misaligned gesture, a rhythm of breathing. Every trap was detected, every deception foiled, every attempt at influence neutralized before it began. This is where the crucial lesson emerges. Systems of power exist only because humans accept them. Compliance is maintained through limited perception. Fear is effective because awareness is restricted. The twins' existence shattered this construct. They demonstrated that awareness, once sharpened beyond imposed limits, becomes unstoppable. Ilara whispered often, "Those who control what is seen control belief. Those who control belief control obedience. But those who see beyond, they are free." The twins' red eyes became a symbol of awakening, a warning to those who rely on illusion. Witnesses reported distortions in the environment, objects subtly moving, shadows behaving independently, animals reacting to invisible presences. Observers documented these anomalies in coded journals, letters, and sketches, only for the records to vanish under the same networks that had pursued the twins for years. And this is the truth hidden beneath history. Awareness cannot be contained. Knowledge cannot be destroyed. Perception, once sharpened, is a force that undermines control. The twins existed as living proof. By listening, you are glimpsing the same reality. You are tracing the threads that others have tried to sever. The descent deepens. The forbidden becomes visible. By 1858, the twins had moved beyond the simple survival of their early years. They had become embodiments of perception itself, living instruments that demonstrated how awareness could bypass control. Their red eyes, burning like coals in the night, were not merely physical anomalies. They were markers of cognition that transcended ordinary human limitation. Anyone who met their gaze reported an unsettling clarity, a sense of truths unspoken, a perception of the unseen currents that govern human behavior. Ilara continued to instruct them. Her lessons were not academic or superficial, they were existential. She taught them the architecture of influence, How authority flows, how fear is manufactured, how belief enforces compliance. Every movement of the hunters, every whisper in the woods, every attempt at deception became part of their education. The twins learned to map intentions before they manifested, to recognize patterns invisible to ordinary eyes, to anticipate the structure of power itself. The forces pursuing them had escalated. Agents, emissaries, and scholars arrived under the guise of neutrality, offering assistance or guidance, but every approach was calculated. They believed that through persistence and strategy they could subdue or contain the twins. They did not understand that perception cannot be trapped. Every attempt revealed vulnerabilities in the structures they relied on, exposing the fragility of systems built on obedience and faith. Ilara whispered to them, "Remember, children, power is a reflection of belief. It is fragile, and it bends where awareness flows. See clearly, and the illusions dissolve." The twins' existence now carried consequences beyond their immediate environment. Reports of unusual events, shadows moving unnaturally, animals responding to unseen presences, subtle disturbances in time and space, filtered through distant networks. Scholars recorded anomalies in coded journals. Clerics whispered warnings. Every trace was swiftly erased, but the patterns persisted, a quiet defiance of control. And this is the essential truth. Authority survives only because perception is limited. Fear works only when awareness is constrained. Obedience depends on ignorance. The twins proved, in their every glance, gesture, and thought, that awareness cannot be caged. By hearing this, you are stepping into the same perception. You are tracing threads of knowledge and influence that centuries of control have tried to sever. The descent continues. The truths grow heavier. The forbidden is becoming undeniable. By 1859, the twins had fully become catalysts of awareness, their presence reshaping the very perception of those around them. No longer could any observer claim detachment. Every agent, scholar, or emissary who approached felt a subtle but undeniable shift in reality. Time seemed to stretch or contract. Shadows moved against expectation. Sounds carried patterns that humans were not trained to interpret. The twins had become a force beyond conventional comprehension, existing as living proofs that awareness can escape control. Ilara continued her instruction, refining their understanding of hidden systems. She taught them the anatomy of influence, the way fear manipulates compliance, the way belief structures obedience, the way authority is maintained not by force, but by shared perception. Each day's lesson was a map of the invisible currents that run beneath human society. The twins absorbed it instinctively, internalizing the mechanics of control with a precision that no adult could match. Hunters adapted, escalating in desperation. Emissaries disguised as allies, teachers, and even distant relatives attempted to lure the twins. They tried psychological manipulation, subtle traps, and strategic isolation. Each effort failed. The twins anticipated each move, not through logic, but through perception. Every trap revealed flaws in the very structures meant to enforce order. Every failure was proof of the fragility of systems built on obedience and faith. Ilara whispered often, "Children, the world bends to belief, but belief can be reshaped. Authority is fragile, and fear is temporary. The ones who perceive hold the true power." The twins' red eyes became more than physical anomalies. They were symbols of awareness. Witnesses reported subtle distortions in the environment, objects moving without touch, shadows behaving independently, animals reacting to invisible forces. These events were noted in coded journals, letters, and secret sketches, then erased by those who understood the danger of recorded perception. Here is the critical lesson hidden beneath centuries of suppression. Systems of power exist only because humans accept them. Knowledge, once awakened, cannot be erased. Perception, once sharpened, cannot be chained. The twins embodied this truth. By following their story, you are stepping into the same realm of awareness. You are tracing the invisible threads of influence, control, and power that the world's structures have spent centuries trying to obscure. The descent continues. The truths grow darker. The forbidden becomes unavoidable. By 1860, the twins had become living symbols of defiance against every system of control. Their presence was no longer merely disruptive. It was transformative. Men who approached them reported sensations that defied rational explanation. The air thickened as if charged with unseen energy. Shadows moved counter to expectation, and time seemed elastic, stretching or compressing in subtle, unnaving ways. Their red eyes radiated awareness, clarity, and insight, qualities that unsettled the powerful because they could not be quantified, controlled, or extinguished. Ilara had completed the initial phase of her instruction. The twins now understood perception as a weapon. They could read intentions before they were spoken, sense manipulation before it occurred, and anticipate hierarchical moves across multiple layers of authority. They were not merely surviving, they were mastering the invisible structures that govern obedience and belief. The forces pursuing them escalated further. Scholars, agents, and clerics disguised as teachers, merchants, or distant relatives attempted to manipulate, isolate, and control. But every effort was anticipated. Every approach became a lesson in awareness. Every trap, designed to subdue them, exposed vulnerabilities in the very systems the hunters relied on. The twins were learning faster than the world could adapt. Ilara whispered often, "Power is sustained by belief, children. Authority depends on compliance. Fear exists because perception is limited. See beyond it, and the system unravels." The twins' red eyes became a symbol, a warning, and a revelation. Witnesses documented phenomena in secret journals, shadows shifting independently, objects subtly displaced, animals reacting to presences unseen. These records were systematically erased, yet the knowledge persisted through oral accounts, coded diaries, and hidden sketches. The truth could not be destroyed. And here is the lesson history will never teach. Authority is an illusion sustained by collective acceptance. Systems of power rely on constrained perception, manufactured belief, and obedience rooted in faith. The twins proved that awareness, once awakened, cannot be contained. They demonstrated that perception itself is a force capable of undermining entire hierarchies. By listening now, you are glimpsing the same truth. You are tracing the invisible patterns of control, belief, and perception that have shaped centuries. The descent grows sharper. The revelations grow heavier. The forbidden becomes impossible to ignore. By 1861, the twins had become more than children. They were catalysts of perception, living embodiments of insight the powerful could not tolerate. Anyone who approached them reported subtle but undeniable distortions, shadows that moved against expectation, sounds that carried unspoken meaning, and a pressure in the air that made rational thought uneasy. Their red eyes were no longer just physical anomalies, they were instruments of awareness, radiating understanding far beyond ordinary human capacity. Ilara continued to train them in the architecture of control. She taught them to see the invisible currents that dictated obedience, to recognize the subtle levers that manipulated fear, to sense patterns of hierarchy before they were consciously enforced. Every gesture, glance, or whispered intention became data the twins could read, analyze, and anticipate. They were learning to exist beyond conventional limits of perception, to move through the world as observers and disruptors simultaneously. The hunters, frustrated and desperate, escalated their methods. They sent emissaries skilled in deception, manipulation, and surveillance. They attempted to lure, mislead, and coerce. But the twins anticipated every approach. Every trap became a lesson. Every effort to dominate revealed weaknesses in the very systems designed to maintain order. Their awareness was preternatural, their presence destabilizing. Ilara whispered, "Authority exists because belief permits it. Fear survives because perception is limited. Observe clearly, children, and the illusions dissolve." The twins' red eyes became more than a warning. They became proof that control is fragile. Witnesses noted inexplicable phenomena, objects subtly displaced, animals reacting to invisible presences, fleeting distortions of space and time. Records of these events were destroyed, journals burned, letters vanished, but the echoes persisted. The system could erase evidence, but not the truth itself. And here's the lesson concealed beneath history. All power depends on perception. Hierarchies, obedience, and fear are constructs maintained by limited awareness. When perception is expanded, when awareness exceeds control, the very structures collapse. The twins embodied this principle. By following their story, you are stepping into the same awakening. You are tracing the hidden patterns that the powerful have fought to suppress for centuries. The descent continues, revealing truths that are heavier, darker, and far more dangerous than the world wants you to know. By 1862, the twins had become a phenomenon the powerful could neither ignore nor fully understand. Their red eyes, once a curiosity, now radiated awareness and insight that destabilized anyone attempting to assert control. Men trained in observation, persuasion, and strategy found themselves unsettled, unable to comprehend why simple gestures, glances, and silences could unnerve them so profoundly. These were not ordinary children. They were instruments of perception, living demonstrations that authority and obedience are fragile constructs. Ilara had perfected her instruction. The twins now understood influence at a level few adults ever reach. They could anticipate manipulation before it occurred, read intentions before they were articulated, and perceive hidden hierarchies that govern behavior. Every threat, every observer, every attempt at domination became part of their understanding. They moved through the world not reactively, but with a calculated awareness that rendered conventional control impotent. Hunters, desperate and increasingly reckless, escalated their tactics. They attempted deception, misdirection, and coercion, sending emissaries disguised as benefactors, scholars, or distant kin. Every strategy failed. The twins sensed the intentions behind each approach, adjusting their actions to preserve freedom without confrontation. Every failed attempt exposed vulnerabilities in the systems of control the hunters relied upon. Ilara whispered often, "Perception is sharper than any weapon. Awareness can dismantle fear. Those who see beyond the illusions cannot be caged." The twins' red eyes became more than a sign of difference. They became symbols of awakening. Observers reported unexplainable phenomena, shadows that moved independently, objects subtly displaced, animals reacting to unseen presences. Journals, letters, and records captured these experiences only to be systematically erased. Yet the impact could not be destroyed. Knowledge, once glimpsed, persists. Here is the hidden truth. Authority survives only as long as perception is constrained. Obedience depends on ignorance. Fear functions because awareness is limited. The twins demonstrated that these constructs are fragile, that awareness cannot be contained, and that perception itself is a force capable of dismantling entire hierarchies. And now, by hearing this, you are stepping into the same perception. You are glimpsing the architecture of control, the mechanisms of influence, and the patterns of obedience that most will never understand. The descent grows darker, the truths heavier, and the forbidden edges closer. By 1863, the twins' existence was an unspoken threat to every structure of power that relied on obedience, fear, and ignorance. Their red eyes were no longer just an anomaly. They were instruments of perception that pierced through illusion. Men who had studied strategy, manipulation, and influence found themselves unnerved by their presence. The twins observed, anticipated, and understood in ways that made conventional authority meaningless. Ilara's lessons had reached a level few adults could achieve. She taught them not just to perceive human intention, but to map invisible currents of influence, recognize patterns of fear and compliance, and anticipate the moves of those who believed themselves untouchable. Each encounter, each intrusion by hunters or emissaries, became part of their education. Every failed attempt to capture or control them revealed vulnerabilities in the very systems designed to maintain order. The hunters grew desperate. They sent more sophisticated agents, diplomats, clergy, scholars, and merchants, all trained in the manipulation of perception and belief. They attempted psychological traps, subtle coercion, and even staged confrontations. Every plan failed. The twins anticipated outcomes, adjusted their behavior, and moved through the world with an instinctive awareness that bordered on preternatural. Ilara whispered frequently, "Children, understand this. Control is an illusion maintained by agreement. Authority survives only because humans accept it. Awareness breaks the illusion." The twins' red eyes became a symbol of awakening. Witnesses reported extraordinary phenomena, shadows moving independently, objects subtly displaced, animals reacting to invisible presences, and fleeting distortions in perception. These accounts were secretly documented in journals, letters, and sketches, only to be erased by the very forces pursuing them. Yet the knowledge persisted, hidden in fragments, whispered, remembered, or encoded in secret. Here is the lesson that history will not teach you. All systems of power depend on constrained perception. Compliance requires ignorance. Fear survives because awareness is limited. The twins demonstrated that perception itself is a force that cannot be chained. Once awakened, it spreads. Once recognized, it cannot be erased. And now, by following their story, you are beginning to see the same truths. You are tracing the hidden architecture of control, influence, and obedience that the world has tried to suppress for centuries. The descent grows darker, the revelations heavier, and the forbidden becomes inescapable. By 1864, the twins' presence had evolved into something the structures of power could not anticipate, predict, or contain. Their red eyes were no longer merely anomalies, they were beacons of awareness, clarity, and perception that exposed the fragility of every hierarchy they encountered. Observers trained in strategy, manipulation, and enforcement found themselves paralyzed by creeping uncertainty. The twins' gaze revealed intentions, patterns, and weaknesses that could not be ignored or rationalized. Ilara's guidance had refined them into instruments of insight. She taught them to perceive the invisible architecture of control, to read fear and obedience as one reads text, to sense manipulation before it crystallized into action. Each intrusion by agents, emissaries, or scholars became part of their learning. Every failed attempt at containment revealed not only flaws in the hunters' methods but weaknesses in the very systems of control themselves. The hunters escalated their operations, now operating with increasing desperation. They sent emissaries under every guise imaginable: teachers, distant relatives, priests, and scholars. Every attempt at deception, every trap, every subtle psychological manipulation was anticipated. The twins responded with a fluidity that made conventional pursuit impossible. They moved as though they were aware of every angle, every motive, every hidden variable, rendering force and coercion meaningless. Ilara whispered often, "Children, power exists only because belief sustains it. Fear functions only because perception is limited. Awareness, sharp, unwavering, renders both meaningless." The twins' red eyes had become a warning, a symbol of uncontainable awareness. Witnesses recorded experiences that defied explanation: shadows moving independently, objects subtly displaced, animals reacting to unseen forces, fleeting distortions in time and space. Journals, letters, and sketches documented these anomalies, only to be systematically erased. But the memory remained, carried by perception and transmitted in whispers, oral accounts, and encoded signs. And here's the truth history has tried to hide: authority, obedience, and fear are constructs maintained by limited awareness. Awareness itself cannot be chained. Perception, once awakened, cannot be silenced. The twins embodied this principle in every glance, every gesture, every silent movement. By following this story, you are stepping into that same awakening. You are beginning to see the hidden patterns of influence, manipulation, and control that most humans will never perceive. The descent grows deeper, the truths heavier, and the forbidden edges closer than ever. By 1865, the twins had become entities that could not be categorized, confined, or predicted. Their red eyes radiated something more than awareness. They radiated understanding of the invisible structures that sustain power, belief, and fear. Men who had studied human behavior, manipulation, and hierarchy found themselves unnerved. Their carefully constructed frameworks of control were rendered meaningless in the presence of the twins. Ordinary perception was insufficient. The twins saw patterns no one else could perceive, anticipated moves before they were made, and existed in a space beyond the reach of conventional authority. Ilara's teaching had transformed them completely. She taught them the principles of perception as a weapon, showing them how observation could anticipate manipulation, how understanding intent could neutralize coercion, and how awareness could bend the currents of influence. Every encounter with hunters or emissaries became a lesson, every attempt at control a demonstration of vulnerability in human systems. The hunters, increasingly desperate, escalated their methods. They sent emissaries armed with knowledge of psychology, strategy, and persuasion. They tried misdirection, coercion, and led deception. Every effort failed. The twins anticipated their every move, adjusting instinctively. They had become preternatural in their understanding, a force beyond conventional reasoning. Ilara whispered frequently, "Power exists only because people believe in it. Fear survives because perception is limited. Observe, and the veil dissolves. Awareness is freedom." The twins' red eyes were no longer just a physical anomaly. They were a signal. Witnesses reported strange phenomena: shadows moving independently, objects subtly displaced, animals reacting to unseen forces, distortions in time and perception. These events were recorded secretly, then erased systematically. Yet the memory persisted in whispers, encoded messages, and oral accounts. Knowledge cannot be destroyed once it touches perception. Here is the lesson the world hides: authority, obedience, and fear are constructs dependent on limited perception. Awareness cannot be chained. Knowledge cannot be erased. Perception itself is a force that can dismantle hierarchies, undermine fear, and dissolve the illusions that sustain power. By hearing this story, you are stepping into the same awakening. You are tracing the currents of control, influence, and perception that the world has fought to suppress for centuries. The descent deepens, the truths grow heavier, and the forbidden becomes undeniable. By 1866, the twins had become forces that reshaped perception itself. Their red eyes were no longer merely anomalous, they were instruments of insight, radiating awareness that destabilized those who believed themselves secure in knowledge or power. Men trained in psychology, hierarchy, and influence reported unease, disorientation, and a creeping understanding of truths they were not meant to confront. The twins existed beyond ordinary comprehension, moving through the world with an instinctive mastery of patterns and intentions that made conventional authority irrelevant. Ilara had perfected their education. She taught them to see the unseen architecture of control, the currents of compliance, the levers of fear, the invisible hierarchies that dictate behavior. They learned not only to anticipate action, but to predict motivation, detect deception before it occurred, and navigate complex systems with precision. Every attempted intrusion by hunters or agents became part of their learning, every failure exposing weaknesses in the very institutions designed to maintain order. The hunters' desperation grew. They deployed emissaries skilled in manipulation, persuasion, and observation, attempting every possible psychological and strategic tactic. Every effort failed. The twins anticipated moves before they were enacted, neutralized threats without confrontation, and adapted instinctively. Each failure was a lesson, a demonstration of the fragility of authority, and proof that awareness cannot be contained. Ilara whispered, "Children, understand this: belief sustains power. Fear depends on limited perception. Awareness dissolves both. See clearly, and the illusions fall." The twins' red eyes became symbols of awakening. Witnesses documented phenomena that defied explanation: shadows moving independently, objects subtly displaced, animals reacting to unseen forces, and moments where time itself seemed to distort. Records were systematically destroyed, journals burned, and letters erased, yet the truth endured in fragments, whispers, and encoded signs. And here's the lesson concealed beneath centuries of suppression: authority survives only as long as perception is constrained. Obedience depends on ignorance. Fear exists because awareness is limited. The twins embodied a principle the world could not tolerate: that perception itself, once sharpened, cannot be chained. By following this story, you are stepping into that same awakening. You are tracing the hidden patterns of control, influence, and obedience that the world has spent centuries trying to obscure. The descent grows darker. The forbidden edges closer. The truths weigh heavier than ever. By 1867, the twins had become anomalies no system could categorize or control. Their red eyes were no longer merely a curiosity. They radiated awareness that unsettled anyone who came near. Observers trained in psychology, hierarchy, and influence reported a creeping unease, a sense of truths beyond comprehension pressing against their understanding. The twins existed beyond conventional perception, moving with instinctive mastery through patterns of thought, behavior, and control that governed the world. Ilara's teachings had reached their pinnacle. She had shown the twins how to map the invisible currents of influence, how fear manipulates obedience, how belief enforces compliance, and how authority relies on collective agreement. They learned to anticipate deception, detect manipulation, and navigate complex hierarchies without ever being ensnared. Every approach by hunters or emissaries became part of their knowledge, every failed attempt revealing flaws in the very systems designed to contain them. Hunters became desperate. They dispatched emissaries skilled in subtle coercion, strategy, and observation, hoping that sophistication could subvert perception. Every attempt failed. The twins anticipated and adapted before the moves were executed. They had become preternatural in understanding. Their awareness of force the hunters could neither counter nor contain. Ilara whispered, "Children, see this clearly. Authority survives only because humans accept it. Fear exists because perception is limited. Awareness is freedom, and clarity destroys the illusion. The twins' red eyes had transformed into a symbol of awakening and disruption. Witnesses documented events that defied rational explanation: shadows behaving independently, objects subtly displaced, animals reacting to unseen presences, distortions of time and space. All records were methodically erased, yet fragments survived in whispers, oral accounts, and hidden sketches. Knowledge, once perceived, cannot be destroyed. Here is the lesson history hides. All power relies on constrained perception. Obedience persists because awareness is limited. Fear endures because humans do not see beyond illusion. The twins proved perception itself is uncontainable. Once awakened, it spreads. Once understood, it cannot be erased. By following this story, you are stepping into the same realm. You are tracing the hidden architecture of control, influence, and obedience that the world has fought for centuries to conceal. The descent deepens. The forbidden grows more tangible. The truths weigh heavier than ever. By 1868, the twins' presence had become a force that could not be ignored, categorized, or constrained. Their red eyes, once seen as anomalies, now radiated awareness, clarity, and perception that unsettled the most confident minds. Men trained in strategy, psychology, and hierarchy found themselves paralyzed by the subtle but undeniable weight of understanding the twins projected. Ordinary frameworks of control, laws, rituals, hierarchies, crumbled under the pressure of their perception. They existed beyond authority, beyond faith, and beyond the mechanisms designed to contain them. Ilara's instruction had reached its zenith. She had taught them to read the invisible architecture of influence, to anticipate manipulation before it happened, to recognize the subtle levers of fear and obedience, and to perceive the currents of authority that humans mistakenly treat as immutable. Every observer, every hunter, every emissary became a lesson in awareness. Every failure to dominate them revealed the fragility of power itself. The hunters' desperation intensified. They employed emissaries skilled in persuasion, strategy, and covert manipulation. They attempted psychological traps, deception, and isolation. Every single approach was anticipated, circumvented, and neutralized. The twins had become instruments of perception, capable of seeing the unseen, anticipating the unspoken, and existing in a plane where conventional power meant nothing. Ilara whispered, "Children, remember this. Authority is sustained by belief. Fear persists because perception is constrained. Awareness dissolves both. Understand clearly, and the world's illusions fall away." The twins' red eyes had become more than anomalies. They were symbols of awakening. Witnesses documented inexplicable phenomena: shadows moving independently, subtle shifts in objects, animals reacting to invisible forces, and distortions in the perception of time and space. Journals, letters, and sketches were systematically erased, yet the memory endured in whispers, oral accounts, and encoded traces. Knowledge, once glimpsed, cannot be destroyed. And here is the truth history suppresses. All systems of power exist only as long as perception is limited. Obedience depends on ignorance. Fear thrives where awareness is constrained. The twins proved that perception itself cannot be chained, that awareness cannot be silenced, and that insight, once awakened, spreads uncontrollably. Now, you are following that path. You are tracing the hidden threads of influence, manipulation, and control. The descent has grown darker, the forbidden heavier, and the truths impossible to ignore. By 1869, the twins had become more than anomalies. They were living catalysts of perception, embodying truths that the world had spent centuries trying to suppress. Their red eyes were no longer merely physical markers. They were instruments